Everyone, and welcome to my second talk in my shorter science and faith kind of short takes talk series. So, the first video that I did asked whether humans are nothing but chemistry. But this one kind of steps back and asks the bigger worldview issue behind that reductionist move. So the first talk was more on reductionism, and this one is actually going to be on kind of a bigger area, a more broader worldview perspective called scientism. And you may say, well, I've never heard that word. I don't know what scientism is. And so you may not have actually heard the word being used, but it is actually pretty prevalent. And once I explain it, you'll go, oh, yeah, I'm actually familiar with that. But I want to be very clear at the beginning of this talk that this is not an anti-science talk. Okay, science is good. I'm a chemist, so I very much appreciate science and think that science is valid and important. The problem is not with science, the problem is with scientism. So let's look at this a little bit more in depth. So, what is the confusion? So many people hear a critique of scientism and assume it's a critique of science itself. But that's actually a mistake. Science is one of the most successful human tools for understanding the physical world. So, for example, here on the screen, it says that science is a powerful method for studying the natural world through observation, testing, measurement, and explanation. But scientism is different. It's not a laboratory result. It's a philosophical claim about what counts as knowledge. So scientism, like I said, is a worldview that treats science as the only or supreme source of real knowledge. So rejecting scientism is not rejecting science. So they're not the same thing. Science and scientism are separate. So, what does science do well then? Science is not the enemy. We benefit from science every day. Science gives us real knowledge about the natural world. It helps us learn about chemistry, medicine, physics, genetics, astronomy, and neuroscience. All of these give us real insight into the world God has made. And these are just a few examples. But Christians do not need to be afraid of good science. The question is not whether science is valuable, very much is. The question is whether science is the only source of truth. So let's talk about what is scientism. So science is a method, whereas scientism is a worldview. So scientism states that it is the belief that science is the only or highest source of real knowledge. Now, scientism often appears in what I would consider kind of softer forms. It may not always say science is the only source of knowledge. It may not say it as strongly as that. Sometimes it says, well, science is really the only serious or reliable source of knowledge. But either way, it pushes other forms of knowledge, moral, historical, philosophical, theological, or even personal, into the category of opinion or private feeling. And so it negates kind of its supremacy or being considered real knowledge. So what is kind of the key difference between these two areas? So let's think about this. A microscope is an excellent tool, but a microscope is not the right tool for every question. You cannot use a microscope to determine whether betrayal is wrong, whether a poem is beautiful, or if life has a purpose. The mistake of scientism is treating one very powerful tool as though it is the only tool. So, like the microscope, using the microscope to answer everything, that's what scientism's idea is, using science to answer everything. Science is a powerful tool, but it's not the only tool. If someone says only science gives truth, so someone says only science gives truth, is that statement itself a scientific truth? Okay. That statement is not a scientific discovery. It's not something that we could do scientifically. We can't go in the lab and do anything. It cannot be tested in a lab. We can't measure it with an instrument or prove by the scientific method that that statement is true. It is not a scientific statement. It's actually a philosophical claim. So if it were true, then ironically, it would actually be false because if science is the only thing that gives truth, that statement is a philosophical claim. And if we cannot get truth from philosophy, then that statement would by itself then have to be false. And this is what we call kind of a self-defeating claim. So this claim actually kind of refutes itself. It contradicts itself because it cannot be proven only through science. So if we want to know this is true, we have to have some other way to determine that outside of science. And if scientism says science is the only truth, then we don't have that option. So I hope that really makes sense, that we need to be able to have other ways of obtaining knowledge and truth. So there are other ways that we know things. There are a lot of things that we know that do not come from a laboratory. We rely on non-scientific knowledge every day. So you, for example, you know historical events happened, but you do not repeat them in a lab. We just understand they happen from, documentation and other historical pieces of evidence. You know logical truths, but we don't discover those logical truths under a microscope. You know betrayal is wrong, but that's not the same kind of claim as measuring, say, the blood pressure. So scientism shrinks knowledge down by pretending these are not real knowledge. So scientism is saying logic, mathematics, history, someone's testimony, moral knowledge, personal experience, beauty, and meaning are not real knowledge. But science needs a foundation. Now, this does not mean that science is weak. What it really means is that science, like every method of knowing, rests on deeper assumptions. Science rests on assumptions that are not themselves discovered by science. So science assumes that the universe is orderly, that our minds can know reality, that truth matters, and that honesty is good. These are not enemies of science. They are part of what makes science possible. But these are truths and kind of foundations of science that science cannot actually support and prove. Interestingly, Christianity gives a strong reason to expect an ordered and intelligible world because the world is created by a rational God. Now, I want to kind of give you a case study like I did in the first talk on reductionism. So let's look at morality. And let's look at this in the case of science and scientism. So morality, so science can tell us what happens in the brain when we make moral judgments. Evolutionary psychology can propose reasons why certain moral instincts have developed. But the description is not the same as obligation. So science can describe what people do, but it cannot by itself tell us why we ought to do what is right. So it can tell us maybe, what's happening and what people are doing, but not the why or why should we be doing one thing or another. This is why scientism actually really struggles with morality. It can measure behavior, but it cannot easily ground moral duty. It doesn't have a framework for explaining that because that moral foundation lies outside of science. Here's another example, history. So history is a good example because it is clearly real knowledge. No one's going to say like, oh, history is not counted as knowledge. But we also would agree that even though history is knowledge, we don't acquire that knowledge the same way as we would a laboratory science. So with history, we use documents, testimony, artifacts, background knowledge, and inference to the best explanation when we're kind of trying to reveal some truths. So, for example, did Julius Caesar really cross the Rubicon? Was Jesus of Nazareth really crucified? And did the American Revolution really happen? We do not know these things by going in a lab and doing an experiment to prove that they happened. We know them through historical methods of analysis. And so this actually is important because it distinguishes between science and scientism. And this also matters for Christianity because Christianity makes historical claims, especially about Jesus of Nazareth. But scientism sometimes dismisses those claims before even examining the historical evidence. Scientism would just say, well, doesn't matter. We can't look at it because it's not related to science, so we can't get real knowledge from it. But I think we would all say, history is a subject we study in school because we think we can actually get knowledge from studying what happened in the past so we don't repeat some of those, negative consequences of the past. Another example case study that I want to go through is meaning. So this actually kind of ties back to that reductionist talk that I gave, that first talk. So in that talk, I kind of talked about how a song is actually physically just sound waves. But we know a song is not merely sound waves. We know a person is made out of cells and chemistry, but a person is not merely cells and chemistry. Science can tell us about mechanisms, but it does not have the tools to tell us the ultimate meaning of a human life. So the mechanism can be true without being the whole meaning. So we need something outside of science to really help answer certain questions and give insight. So let's talk specifically about Christianity and science. So Christianity, for the record, does not make science impossible. Honestly, actually, historically, many Christians pursued science because they believed nature was the rational creation of a rational God. The Christian faith gives reasons to expect an ordered and intelligible world. It was believed that the world is created and not accidental chaos, and that creation is ordered and intelligible. Human minds are capable of seeking this truth. So studying nature can be a way of appreciating God's world. So this is why a lot of Christians would actually study science as a way to learn about God and his creation and to grow closer to him. So science is not a threat to Christianity when science stays science. When science becomes scientism, then that's a different category, a different discussion. So also, this doesn't mean that only Christians do science. It means that Christianity is deeply compatible with the assumptions that make science fruitful. So Christianity and science kind of go hand in hand together. So if I say that Christianity and science go hand to hand together, so then where would the conflict actually happen between these two groups? So the common story that you might hear is that science and Christianity are enemies. But often the real conflict is not between Christianity and science. It's actually between Christianity and scientism. Like I said, science studies the physical world, God's world. But scientism turns the physical world into the whole of reality. The material world is all there is. And that's where the conflict happens. So scientism does not affect laboratories. It affects how we see life. Remember, I said that scientism is a worldview. It's a perspective that we have when we're looking at knowledge and understanding and truth. So if scientism is true, then things like love, morality, beauty, purpose, God, and human dignity are pushed outside the realm of real knowledge. And this is why the issue matters not just for philosophers, but for ordinary people. because scientism can make the deepest parts of human life look unreal. So here's the main point. Christians should not be anti-science. We should love science, support careful research, and follow the evidence. But we should also reject the claim that science is the only source of truth, or that the material world is all there is. So love science, reject scientism, because science is a gift. It's not a God, but it's a gift from God. Science helps us understand God's world, whereas scientism tells us God's world is all there is. So thank you so much for coming to my talk. I hope this kind of helps you rethink, how do you look at science and how do you view science in relationship to other areas of knowledge? Are you leaning in a healthy area of science, or do you lean more to the scientism kind of perspective and worldview? So just challenge you to kind of self-reflect on that, and also to think about the information that's presented to us from the various newspapers and information outlets. What are we getting? Are they providing science, or are they providing a scientism or scientism worldview? So here are just a few of the references for this talk, and I hope you join me in my next short talk. Thank you.